Hi, everybody. Welcome to another inspirational interview here on Artful Minds. I'm your host, Michael King, and tonight we're going to be interviewing Zoe Frank. Let me just add her as a spotlight. Zoe is an American painter whose paintings reflect the passage of time and the exploration of pictorial space in intriguing compositions with fragmented perspectives. Welcome, Zoe. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm just tickled pink that you've allowed me to interview you.
Sure, happy to be here and get to
Excellent.
chat. Yeah.
Before we get that, I'm going to put Zoe's information in chat. If you don't follow her on Instagram as well, now's your chance.
You get the most up-to-date updates on Instagram these days.
Yeah, for sure, right? I'm just going to share my screen here. So I'm going to scroll through a selection of your work. This one, I just love this one. But as I'm scrolling through, could you just tell us a little bit more about yourself?
I did a kind of academic training originally at an atelier with Juliet Aristides in Seattle. And then I got my MFA at Laguna College of Art and Design. And yeah, I think the paintings are kind of all in some ways pushing back against that academic training that I did, both kind of really making use of those skills, kind of observational painting and the kind of learning that anatomy. Here's a figure paint, one with a figure, learning all that kind of anatomy and structure and how to build a painting, and then really playing with all the things I was told not to do for those 4 years and trying everything else out and kind of experimenting with different ways of approaching paintings and breaking up the paintings and kind of playing with composition and things like that. So I'm really excited about the formal aspects of making the work of the kind of relationships of the colors, trying out different color palette, trying out kind of these bits of abstraction and with the representational elements of the paintings and kind of taking this more experimental approach to the work. So each painting, I'm kind of trying out some new idea that I want to figure out if it can work in the painting in a more kind of formal way. I think that's been the kind of underpinning of what I'm doing more than the kind of subject matter. The subject matter is a little bit more just kind of whatever happens to be around me that I can grab onto to explore some of these ideas about color and space and how I'm putting paint on the surface and those kind of things that are just kind of about painting that get me really excited to move on to the next project.
Thank you for that. And every time I look at your paintings, I spend time and time again just staring at them. You're my Instagram hole, I guess you could say it. I'll share this. This was the very first, this eggplant. This is the very first painting I saw of yours on Instagram, and it stopped me in my tracks. And I looked at it primarily because I really loved your sense of cool light against the warm light siding. And then I got into it and I saw the warmer light down below. And then I noticed this object to the bottom right. And I thought, oh, that must be just the unfinished drip tray of the plant. But something's telling me it's not. It's just how you're starting to break up your space. And then, of course, we have these colored objects within it. And I thought that's really interesting how she's handling that. And then, of course, I pushed into the rest of your feed. And I said, oh my God, what have I got myself into? And that was it for me. And I just find it so fascinating that you've taken the idea of representative painting and you've taken it and fragmented it, but in a way that it still makes sense. It isn't just a shtick kind of idea, right? And
yeah, I'm hoping to be kind of finding so that was the base of the drip tray, from that egg. Yeah. So I think I had painted that in and then that shape didn't quite work as well with the composition. And so I tried just kind of painting it mainly out. And so I think some of it not feeling like a shtick is from not having those things kind of planned out and just like trying to get the composition to work and being willing to move things into the painting. Like I was kind of adding in some of those colored elements or just taking things out or kind of adding some extra shapes in if needed to just try and like get the painting to work.
Sorry, those colored shapes then, they weren't necessarily there in the background or anywhere in your reference. You just wanted to put
I was working
color.
I was working from observation and I added those in. I think there were is like a hummingbird feeder and a little like careen thing from the kitchen that I threw in there. So I'm putting things into the composition in order to kind of help it out. Like I kind of thought like, we had this green eggplant and it needed some like a little bit area of a little bit more chroma in the composition. So I was, pushing a little bird feeder that we had, sitting nearby and kind of moving that in and seeing if that could solve the problem. And then adding another one to balance that out. And then, so it's I'm kind of grabbing from things in the environment to, again, just try and get the composition to work, to get the painting to function as a whole.
Yeah, and I guess if you put a mark somewhere and it doesn't work, you'll go over it to erase it, I guess, and then progress to find its location. over and over. Is that the process?
I do move things around a bit, and you kind of see these remnants of what was painted before, the other layers of paint, because sometimes I don't entirely erase things. I'll kind of half erase it as I'm kind of like remembering what was there and keeping track of what I'd done the first time as I'm trying like the second version of it. So these paintings have some parts that are really thin that just have, maybe one layer of paint, and then other parts where I've painted it, 20 times as I'm trying out different solutions.
When an archivist starts photographing your painting under all the different light frequencies, they're just going to freak out because it's just going to look like a total mess. Is that right?
It'd be interesting to see the X-ray version of these things.
Absolutely,
there's entire people who've been taken in and out of paintings or put into different positions, and
oh my God, I want to be on a flying wall in your studio.
It happens very slowly, so
okay.
It's a little bit boring, but yeah.
So this is going to, lost the image. I just want to bring it up here. So I'm going to jump ahead then to this piece, just because of what we were talking about, how you bring elements in and out. And this piece I found interesting because I listened to you talk about it on YouTube. So if anybody's interested, you can find a lot more videos with Zoe Frank on YouTube. And you talked about this because I was interested in your still lives. And this is kind of an anti-still life in the sense that this is a communal kitchen and you set it up and started to paint. And then each day you'd go back and everything would change and you fit things into the composition or remove things from the composition over and over again until you came up with this, correct?
Yeah, exactly. So I was originally like, I liked I think the lemon was there originally, and I love the tile that was in this kitchen. So it was that like relationship of that yellow lemon on the blue tile was what made me like want to make the painting. And then the rest of it was kind of coming and going and shifting from day to day. So I was kind of holding on to the parts that worked for me and that were like helping make the painting work, and then kind of trying different things out. And I hated still lifes originally because I didn't like the process of having to set something up and trying to get it to be like this perfect arrangement of things. So working in a situation like this where the still life is being kind of created for me each day by my roommates was fantastic. They're using the kitchen and suggesting like, just by using the space that like, maybe this colander might work. And again, I'm kind of pushing things in and out and moving things around a little bit as I think might help kind of balance the composition the same way I was doing with those little hummingbird feeders in the eggplant one.
Yeah, exactly. That's why it reminded me of this. And I love that idea in the sense that's because I've been to that whole still life aspect too, and you spend more time figuring things out and less time painting. But I love this idea that you can just lay out 2-3 elements that you love, work on that, and then introduce new elements or take out the old elements, and you have a ever developing still life. It kind of reminds me of the plein air of still life in a sense, right?
Yeah, you're more kind of just capturing what happens to be there and trying to kind of distill and make sense of it. Yeah, that's true.
But I guess you did start out with a focused area where these tiles are, and then also this seems like some sort of white container box that was kind of set, and everything else evolved through that, correct?
Yeah, I think it was a microwave that was there to begin with. Yeah, and the other stuff was moving around more. So there's some parts that, again, were more stable. And like with that eggplant one, the container was the kind of the stable part. So I was using that to kind of measure where everything else should be, because that little pot didn't move, but the eggplant was growing over the course of several months and changing in size and shape, as I was working on it as well. And I think I really like what happens to the paintings when I'm working this way. Like it both makes this kind of more rich surface that has all this complexity of all of that finding of the painting. And I like that. I like that kind of tactile quality where it doesn't feel too facile. It's not like, I just painted this and it happened to like come out perfectly. You kind of see the struggle in the surface a little bit. And I kind of appreciate that. And also I end up coming up with compositions and ideas in the painting that are better than what I would have pre-planned. When my first thought is not my best thought when it comes to painting. Like I kind of have this really boring initial idea of what the painting could be. And when I let it evolve and develop over the course of, a few months or whatever it takes to make that particular painting, something unexpected usually arises. And that's actually much more interesting, especially to me as I'm working on it. So I'm also I feel more alive when there's something unexpected happening and I'm kind of finding it and learning something from the process.
No doubt.
Rather than just having the idea in my head and kind of then going through the process of just making the painting happen.
That's right. So even with the eggplant painting, then it started off smaller and it grew and grew. I guess you had no worry if it grew off this edge of the canvas, you kind of deal with it at the time, right?
Well, that's sort of like the moving things in and out. Like I am kind of controlling things a little bit, I can
Okay.
stop painting it, before, I was kind of trying to catch things when they felt like they were advantageous to the painting. So I was painting like the eggplant when it was at its full eggplantness. And then I picked it and ate it and it wasn't there anymore, but I didn't paint it out. I left the plant, the actual fruit on the, in the painting, because that felt like the culmination of the eggplant being an eggplant.
Yeah, for sure.
And
for
I
sure.
would stop, and I kind of stopped painting the leaves at, at a certain point.
Gotcha.
So I'm kind of I'm building these, from observations, but the setups that you're seeing kind of never actually all existed at once. And I'm not just painting what happens to be there. I'm pulling from it to build a composition.
Okay, so this brings me to, you started off in an atelier, and when we were talking previously, you said you left the atelier about 2011, so that's about 12 years ago. And then you said you went to your MFA. Now, at what point, because when you go into an atelier, you're programmed to do everything strict and adhere to the principles, which I think is fantastic, because unless you know them, you can't break them. But at what point did you realize that this is, for lack of a better word, this is boring and I don't really want to represent things as they're represented. I want to move past that. Did the MFA help you break into that? Or did you find that where you are right now somewhere else?
No, the MFA was hugely helpful. So it was kind of halfway through the program that my work really shifted. And when I came into the program, I was using that same academic approach. I would make a drawing that I would kind of fully refine, and then I would transfer that to the canvas, do a brown underpainting, and then paint it section by section, doing this kind of academic process. And during the MFA program, I had a class that was about time and painting, and thinking about kind of different ways of approaching time in the work. And some of them were more theoretical, like having kind of multiple figures in one composition at different stages of kind of a day. And then I did a project where I was painting something that was changing, and trying to paint it was painting a tabaret. I would think you actually have that painting in the slideshow. So that tabaret painting was my real breakthrough moment in halfway through the MFA program. And that process kind of then has influenced everything that I've done since. And I've done a lot of other different experiments, but that was the first kind of experimental approach to making a painting, where I don't know if you can see, but it was actually on there's two smaller canvases that are actually pasted onto a larger board. Those are the parameters of those two. So I was not even having to decide the composition at the beginning. I was kind of just finding the whole thing as I was going, and I was using that tabaret every day. So adding, my brushes and my apron and everything were kind of coming in and out of the space. So I couldn't approach it in that same way that I'd been approaching paintings before. Because the setup was different every time. I couldn't do a fully formed drawing of it and then paint it section by section, because that section wouldn't be there 2 days from now. And that felt, again, I felt more alive when I was working that way. So that felt, and it feels like the kind of more engaged and alive I am as I'm making the painting, the more those paintings will give back and have more of that kind of energy in them, I'm hoping, for the viewer to kind of get some of that energy that I was putting into them.
Yeah, so that was the first. That's interesting to see, because it is more, I don't want to say put together, but objects are more objects in that first one, even though you expanded the canvas compared to your current works, where it's really about the whole space and things just happen to kind of fit into it. Yeah, and the object isn't necessarily the object. It's or a slice of an object, or object in a certain time here and the object's in another time here, right? That's an interesting that's your first one. That changes my perspective of that piece a lot. Interesting. Yeah. So it's been kind of a series of different experiments that I've done since then. And that one really felt like the first painting that got me headed towards the work that I'm doing now. So doing the MFA was really valuable for me in terms of being able to break out of that academic training and start finding my own way of working. And the thing I've been thinking about recently is just that, and I guess kind of from there, is that kind of the very way we paint holds meaning in it, and that academic approach is a very kind of conservative way of working. It's kind of a conservative viewpoint. I don't know, I wanted something that incorporates more of the kind of history of modernism as well, that feels more contemporary and feels like it's being made today by me, that isn't just kind of using this specific approach that I was taught. Yeah, but it gave you the tools, right? That specific approach gave you the tools to be who you are right now, right? I mean, totally. Yeah, definitely an essential aspect of it, without a doubt. So this is your sandwich series, and you said in one of your videos, and I'm so glad there's videos online because it makes my life so much easier, but you are looking, this is kind of a quote, you're looking to create paintings foremost and the subject as the secondary object. And I'd love to talk to you a little bit more about this as I show everyone the sandwich series. And just because the object is secondary to the entire painting, I find.
Yeah, it's been helpful to me in some ways to paint things that are kind of stupid, like just painting a sandwich over and over again. So it's not about the sandwich, it's about the space and the way that I'm painting, and having something that doesn't carry a ton of weight and meaning and isn't like, doesn't have all this memory and kind of baggage with it, I guess. For me, is just, it kind of freed me up to just really try and make each of these paintings different and have a specific kind of idea about kind of space that I was playing with in these ones in particular. So in this case, these were based on this book, William Dunning's kind of Changing Images of Pictorial Space. I just taught a class about this book. There is an online course available, which really goes into all of this. So each of the chapters of the book was looking at a different historical period of how space in painting was approached, that kind of how much depth and how much flatness was being used in the painting. And so I was trying out a sandwich to kind of play with those space from each period. So there's a kind of medieval inspired sandwich and a sandwich where I'm like kind of looking at how Giotto might approach a sandwich, and so on and so forth, which was really fun.
That's
so
right, because I actually started reading that book last year, and I'm only about halfway through. But now that I know the sandwich series is based on that book, I'm going to be doing a deep dive. 100%. I'm going to see, oh yeah, that's the medieval period. So let me just, I just want to share the screen. Is it? Oh yeah, that makes sense. So this is the book she's talking about, the Changing Images of Pictorial Space. Fascinating. I've understood so many more artists in the art world because of this book, and I'm only halfway through.
I found it really fun.
Yeah, I didn't know if it came from like your style, or not style, but your interpretation. I didn't know if it came from informal subdivision based on Andrew Loomis and some other artists that came up with how to divide the canvas. But this, knowing that you use that book for it, it makes a lot of sense. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, the abstractions and breaking things up are more kind of intuitive. Like one way I've been thinking about them is just like abstract kind of solutions to representational problems. So I'll have a painting and it's like, it's out of balance. And sometimes I'm like, oh, maybe I could add, as I was saying, like a little red hummingbird feeder here. And sometimes I'm kind of saying, oh, maybe I could just add a little like red rectangle, and I kind of go back and forth between those two solutions. So sometimes I'm bringing in different representational elements to make it work. And sometimes I'm just trying like, what if this neon, what if a little section of neon yellow could solve the problem and make my eye kind of move through the space the way I want it to.
Interesting. So are you trying to, like, for example, with the bird feeder, are you trying to just represent that object through a block of color, or are you also just adding a block of color for the sake of adding a block of color? Beyond what you see.
Sometimes I will just add color, like just an abstract piece of color to make it work. And then sometimes I will find an object that kind of meets those criteria where I'm like, oh, I think I need a rectangular, red object, and I'll find something that kind of fits that. And there isn't really a rhyme or reason to when I'm doing one or the other. I think that's also kind of intuitive of just like trying things out to make the painting work. And sometimes like I'll just have like a triangular, kind of black triangular shape in a corner for a few months, and then I'll realize like, oh no, I really do need something else there, and I'll paint in a banana tree or something.
That's interesting.
So I kind of go back and forth between adding actual objects and adding those shapes in, kind of again just trying to get these paintings to settle into something that feels satisfying to me.
That's fascinating. I once heard a quote, I don't know who it was from, but painting is nothing more than a series of corrections. And I think you're the epitome of that, because you'll make a decision to put in this black triangle, and then 3 months later, you'll make a decision to remove it and add something else, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's such a fantastic way to paint. It's just a lot more freeing, it seems, right?
Yeah. And it feels like they're not mistakes, that it's like, it wasn't like, that was like a stepping stone that I needed to get me to the solution that I eventually land on, but that I couldn't have gotten to the finished painting without having that black triangle in there for that period. Like sometimes things are just kind of like a little note to myself about what we need something here, but like completely essential. And then maybe there's a little bit of the angle of that black triangle that kind of comes through in the painting. And I like that. I like that's part of the process.
Now, because we're in your studio and you have those two pieces behind you, you kind of gave me the gist of them before we started this conversation, but I bet you some of the people are probably wondering, what are those paintings? How big is it going to be? And how long has it been in development?
Yeah, so the painting behind me, this is, I don't know, how do I get out of the way? This is the bottom half of the painting. So it's actually going to be 20 feet high, well, 18 feet high and 20 feet wide. So it's just absolutely giant, which is just absurd. I don't know where it's going to fit yet. And it's still in process. So I kind of laid out all these shapes, and I have some elements of abstraction in there and some figures in there, but I'm still kind of, I don't know, I need to still sort through how they're really going to fit together and really work still, but it's all laid out now. And I started it a couple years ago, and then I was pregnant for 9 months, and it was hard to work on while I wasn't feeling so great. To work on this painting, I'm like standing up on a big ladder and then sitting on the floor and then walking 20 feet back and forth to see what I'm doing. And then I also have, so then the other half of the painting, the top half is on the wall that I'm facing on the other half of the studio. And then I'm hoping at some point to be able to put them all together in a space. It's gonna be, this big kind of square composition, and be able to work on them, with like a scissor lift or a cherry picker or whatever, and kind of make some adjustments to it all together. But I need an even bigger space to be able to make that happen.
No doubt. So this is probably so different from your atelier where you worked on your small studies, et cetera, et cetera. But how long until you were comfortable working on a painting that size? Like you obviously didn't do the jump
well,
overnight.
I'm very uncomfortable at the moment.
Okay, good to hear.
I think I've just gradually gotten bigger and bigger, and each one that works kind of and sells gives me some kind of license to try something even bigger and bolder. So it's kind of been gradually building up to that. But I always liked, my last year in the atelier, I made a painting that was like, that felt huge at the time. It was like 6 feet tall by 3 feet wide. It was a self-portrait. So I was almost life size. So I think I've had this impulse from the kind of beginning to work as big as I could. I think this might be as big as I go. This seems to be, I shouldn't say that. It would be fun to do a giant mural on the side of the building at some point too.
Oh, there you go. I think that's only way to go left, right? I mean, because if this sells, you're going to want that ambition to go bigger, right?
Bigger, yeah. The problem with the murals is that it's harder to do that process of like finding it and erasing and changing. Like I think the murals, you'd be really wise to have it pre-planned and stick to your plan. So it's fun to be working on these canvases where I can move them around and kind of be working on them over time in the studio this way.
Now, for your smaller paintings, I could see this being a little more relevant than the bigger pieces, but I could be entirely wrong. But how important is mark making in your work?
I feel like, I don't know, I want mark making to just be kind of a happenstance of like just how I'm like finding the painting. I don't want marks just for the, I don't know, I like mark making can end up feeling a little, I don't know, ornamental or just decorative or something. I don't know, rather than like just part of the foundation of the painting. I have ended up developing kind of my own way of, holding the brush and a way that feels like natural to me to put down the paint. It's kind of like your handwriting, that you have a way that you write, and the way that you put down paint is particular to each person. And it's neat to see that, but I don't want to like spend time, I don't know, trying to make my handwriting look a certain way. It's just sort of, that's how my hand moves, and that's how the letters come out. Yeah, I think it's maybe more like that, I guess.
Yeah, so you don't try to contrive it, you just let it happen and it becomes you, right?
Yeah.
Nice. Which is good advice, I think, for everyone, right?
Yeah, just trying to make the paintings work, and then and I guess the thing I am trying to avoid is like smoothing things out. Like I don't want to go back, and I don't need to make everything all kind of polished and perfect. Like I'm just trying to like, get the paint on there. I like painting with thick paint and a bristle brush, and I sometimes end up kind of dragging paint over the surface. So there's kind of this crustiness that comes through from below. And so there's like certain things that I've started doing that kind of happen in some of the paintings that, made me start to feel like, oh, that's like a thing that I do in some of the paintings that like it feels like a little bit particular to me.
Yeah. I mean, you can really see the thick paint even in the photos for the sandwich series.
Yeah.
There's some
really thick paint on there.
Thick paint, right? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, totally.
I guess with your painting, the way you developed your painting and you keep on just working on it when you're working on it, you must have what, a half dozen paintings on the go at the same time?
Yeah, I think that I keep saying that I think the ideal number for me is like 5 paintings.
Oh, okay.
To make sure that I'm like finishing things. And Because I love starting paintings and I don't always love finishing them. So if I have too many going, then I just have to finish too many things all at once, and it becomes a little bit burdensome to like have all of that finishing to do, which does happen. That kind of happened before my last show, where I had, maybe more like 10 paintings underway. Yeah, but somewhere between 5 to 10, I think is good for me. I definitely like having multiple projects. Having just one, I feel like I'm just kind of feeling like I'm banging my head against the wall, because of I always get stuck and frustrated at some point in the process. And for me, it's really nice to be able to set something aside and kind of look at it out of the corner of my eye for a little while I focus on something else, and then hope that some brilliant idea will come to me for how to resolve and kind of move it forward. And sometimes there's like I did a painting of this big grapevine on our back patio, and ended up taking me 2 full summers. And then there's actually like a winter panel in there. So it's on like 15 different panels, and each one's in kind of a different season and things. And it's sort of helpful that I was working on it over that year and a half to be able to grab those little, like I wasn't intending to have a winter panel, and here I was, not 9 months into the painting. It's like, oh, the leaves look so different and cool in the winter.
Oh
like
my
I
God.
gotta capture that too.
Wow. I want to live in your brain for a week just to see what it's like. Right. It'd just be amazing. Be amazing. We know you're a painter. We know you love painting, but what's your favorite part of painting? Is it the creation? Is it the end? Is it all the evolution and changing in the middle? I mean, there must be one part of it that you really, really love, no?
I was just saying, it's definitely not the end. I think it's once I have the idea and then I'm laying it out, I think is my favorite part. Like, I don't love the planning part, but once I know what I want to do, and I start just painting on the canvas, there's this tremendous amount of like energy and optimism at that phase, where I feel like I know what I'm going to do, and this is going to be the best painting I've ever made. And I'm like so excited, and it goes down really fast. I make a lot of progress really quickly, and I kind of have that momentum, and I'll often work on one painting for a number of weeks, just full time kind of on that painting, until I get to the point where I'm stuck and not sure how to proceed. And it's not the greatest painting I've ever made yet, and then I set it aside. So that's my favorite part, is that beginning stage.
Yeah, for sure. But I guess the way you handle the big one you have behind you is a lot different than the one that you did in the kitchen, because the kitchen you kind of started and let it evolve, but the one on behind you, you must have had a much larger plan, obviously, right?
A little bit. I did. I did.
Jeez.
A wiser person might have had more of a plan to begin with on this larger painting. But I did do some little color studies. I do for the larger kind of multi-figure compositions. I'll usually do a kind of gouache study that's like kind of like 1 inch to 1 foot ratio. So I'm like not solving that. So it's like, maybe this one was actually, I did even smaller, I guess. So it's just like a little gouache study. And I'm trying to figure out the overall arrangement of the figures and the space, the architecture and things like that. But I'm not planning out any of that abstraction. I'm just kind of planning out where the people are going to go. And then that even changes too. Like sometimes I will, as I was saying, kind of take people in and out as needed.
Okay. So do you do like kind of multiple of those gouache studies, or you kind of do the one and then you get straight into the big piece?
I often do. I think there were 2 that I did for this one. Okay. I usually do a few of them. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Kind of trying out a couple different ideas, kind of different times of day or different environments that the painting could happen in, or different ways that I might want to approach the painting. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. You mentioned that the end isn't really your favorite. But how do you know when you're finished?
That's hard. The 2 things I think about, the one is just kind of visually, I'm kind of looking around the painting over time and seeing if my eye gets caught anywhere, and if there's anything that's bothering me. And if there's places where my eye keeps getting caught, then I'm either kind of repainting those or erasing those, or adding something else to balance that place out. So adjusting the painting that way so that my eye just keeps moving through the image. I've been thinking less about having a focal point and more about just keeping my eye moving. So I'm actually kind of trying to sometimes hide my figures into the paintings, or bring in these elements of abstraction so that my eye is just kind of dancing through the space and not getting stuck anywhere. So that's the kind of practical thing. And then the other one is just sort of this gut check of like, is this having like the kind of emotional resonance for me that I was hoping at the beginning, or having some echo of what kind of great paintings can do when I stand in front of a Velázquez or a Caravaggio or something. Like, is there some echo of that's kind of coming back out of the painting?
It's funny that you mentioned focal point, because I was going to ask you about that. And maybe like the eggplant, we could argue that the eggplant itself is the focal point.
Yeah.
But nowadays, especially for the one behind you and some others that I've seen, I was curious about whether or not you had focal points. And so you're just looking for an even flow of energy, of interest all through the piece, and not for something that stands out the most.
Yeah, yeah. So thinking more about like, I mean, even like a Jackson Pollock, like an all over composition, but more kind of coming out of like a Cezanne, where there's this sort of equal attention to each part of the painting. And you're just kind of, your eye is moving through this whole kind of constructed space, and that there isn't one part that's given priority or over any other part, which I kind of like. Our minds already fixate on figures so strongly, or on faces. And I just want to bring like, oh, this plant is just as important as the head. This empty, space of ground is just as important as the head. Like each part, I just want to have kind of this equal gaze across the whole surface in some way.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, do you find that style of painting where you're trying to create a balance and equality through it all while keeping that interest is more of an advanced stage of painting, or do you think it's something that people can tackle earlier in a career of painting?
Oh, I hadn't thought about that. I think it's just a different approach. I think it's, just a different way of approaching composition that anybody could approach that way. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Just thinking about that kind of giving kind of equal. And I talk about that with when I've, taught students, is like, I want you to there's like something that makes you fall in love with the motif and makes you want to paint it. But you then have to like kind of equally love each corner, each area of the painting. You need to like generate equal love for all of those parts, so that it doesn't feel kind of neglected, and that the parts that you really care about become stronger for having that attention given to equal area to all the other parts. You can think about that like in a portrait, in a formal portrait painting, like if the face is really well painted and then the shirt is just kind of like yada yada yada, the face doesn't hold up as much as if you like really painted in that shirt. So that's what I'm kind of telling myself as I'm working on things, because I'm more excited about painting somebody's nose than the wrinkle on their shirt too. But you have to like get really excited about those wrinkles on the shirt.
Well, and sometimes you can be right. Sometimes that wrinkle in the shirt is like, wow, that's amazing.
Yeah. And
Right?
well, and you have to like generate that genuine excitement and actually be like, oh my gosh, the shapes in there are actually really cool.
Yeah.
And those color relationships, and how do I make like the shadow and the light really happen there? Like you have to find something that genuinely gets that kind of attention to each part, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fascinating. And do you find, well, obviously from your atelier days, but even from your first Tabaret painting, do you find yourself progressively getting more abstract?
A little bit, yes. I've kind of brought in more abstraction in the last couple of years, and kind of fallen in love with abstract painting more recently, like in the last maybe 5 years or so, where I wasn't interested in that at all when I was doing the atelier program and directly afterwards. And now I feel like I have this whole new set of friends to visit at the museums. When I go through the modern section, I'm like, oh my gosh, I want to see all the de Koonings and and the Clifford stills and all of those.
Yeah, no doubt.
Excited by those. So wanting more of that, as my own interests have expanded, I like want all of that to be in the painting. I'm like just excited to kind of throw in the whole kitchen sink.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting to know that as you've progressed, you find abstracts more appealing than you say you did previously. Probably because, well, obviously you're developing yourself into an abstract kind of style, and so you start looking for where it is. It seems I find that relationship really interesting.
There's also something about the things that I'm excited about in representational painting are not what the subject matter is. It's like the arrangement of light and shape and color and form and how those are interacting with each other. And like abstract painting is like the same stuff. It's just kind of distilled down into just being light and shape and color and all of those elements. So when I'm looking at a Joan Mitchell, it's like it's functioning the same way as a traditional representational painting might. And the things that I'm loving when I'm looking at a Titian are happening in that Joan Mitchell painting. So I think I'm feeling like there's less of a, I think I was trained in the atelier to think of these as like opposing forces that had nothing to do with each other. And I think now I'm more just feeling like they're all parts of exploring what painting can do. And I want to kind of make use of all of those different approaches to kind of find my own way and what works for me and what makes the painting work and all of that.
Yeah, for sure. This makes me interested in seeing where you are in 10 years. Who knows? You might be absolutely abstract, right?
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, definitely. There's one question here. Do you have any workshops coming up?
I don't have anything scheduled at the moment, but I have recorded versions of all the courses that I've taught online before on my website. If you want to check those out. So they're still available to work through at your own pace.
For me, I see you as, well, the epitome of a professional artist. I actually see you above many professional artists I admire just because your way of thinking. But there must have been a time when you didn't have the confidence. You submitted stuff, you get rejected, you had doubts, you had concerns. How did you handle that back then? How do you handle your rejection to shows or maybe even possibly galleries when you brought work in and they said, no, you're not ready?
Oh, that still happens a lot.
Okay, that's reassuring.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I applied for a whole bunch of things this past year and I didn't get any of them. So yeah, I think that just keeps happening. I don't know. The thing I keep coming back to is just really focusing on the painting first and foremost, and that and making sure that I'm not painting for a show or painting for a gallery, but doing the shows and working with the galleries in order to keep painting, and that I'm in it to be able to just make the paintings, and that's what I love doing. And I just want to like keep supporting that because that's the part that I have the most, you don't have much control over the rest of it. And then just trying to like keep putting the time in, I guess. So like, I know someone gave the advice about spending kind of 80% of your time painting and 20% working on the business stuff. So just making sure that I'm like continuing to put in some time applying for things and putting myself out there and working on the, doing the social media and all of that stuff in order to then support that 80% of just getting to make the paintings. So that because it can be so discouraging to feel like you put all these time into reaching out to places and putting together applications and having them lead nowhere is just continues to feel demoralizing, I think. But just be like, okay, I'm putting in the 20% and I'm making my paintings, and the rest is sort of not particularly something that we have control over.
Yeah. And I have to say it's relieving to say that even you get rejected. So
so much.
it's so interesting to me that an artist at your level would be rejected for submissions. But you did say something previously, and I think this is quite important, is that you're painting for yourself. You're painting what you love instead of what is being asked for. And I think that's a very important journey for every artist to be in, because that's the only way you can find yourself, correct?
Yeah. And really trying to set myself up so that I'm not like needing to finish a bunch of paintings for a show that I've already scheduled, like really giving myself the time to just make the paintings that I want to make and let that evolution happen and not be kind of locked into, feeling like, oh, I need 10 of these specific size or a specific, motif or specific genre or anything, so that I'm continually like on this kind of path of investigation, which is what makes the work, I think, feel more alive for me and for people who are looking at it. So it's not just this kind of product that's being churned out, but this kind of exploration path that I'm on. And that's the way that I've like found my way to making this work that actually does look, I think, more like my work somehow, letting that kind of evolution happen.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for that. Now, great question here. Can you speak about how you go about placing figures in your space, maintaining the believability, but also how you play with the sizes, etc.?
Boy, I showed this in one of those classes, some examples of how I'm playing with it, like with these figures versus how they actually were in the space. I have some examples of that, but I've been wanting to kind of fill the compositions. I've been looking at like Baroque compositions, or this one is kind of based off of a Velasquez painting. And I'm just wanting so I'm often looking at historical compositions to think about where I might want to place the figures and kind of using those as like an armature. So that was the case with this one. But then also think about just like how I want the space to feel. So I'm wanting these figures to like push forward and kind of fill up the whole canvas as much as they possibly can. So my figures are like, they get smaller as they go back in space, but not at the rate that they actually would in reality. So my figures just get only a tiny bit smaller as they go back in space, so that it feels like they're all just pushing forward and filling up that whole canvas. It's just fun to be kind of playing with things like that and feeling a little bit freed up from, the reality that we're seeing, or how things would look if they were just, if you were to just take a snapshot of the scene.
Yeah. And I guess that kind of goes back to the book, The Changing Images of Pictorial Space, just in some aspects, not fully realizing what reality shows you, but manipulating it to create an interest that you're looking for, in a sense, because they did that back then, and you're in essence doing the exact same thing, right?
Yeah, and it feels like there's like this reality to like painted space, like like kind of following in that history that feels more real to me in some way than like what you happen to capture with a iPhone camera. Like that feels like that's just like a separate reality then. So that idea of like filling the canvas with the figures was another artist I think about is Piero della Francesca. There's this big like battle scene. So he's this kind of pre-Renaissance painter, really early Renaissance, and all the figures are just like kind of, it's just one figure on top of the next. There's no kind of negative shapes and no negative space. It's just all these big big shapes filling the space. And so, I don't know, kind of being part of that kind of trajectory of history and incorporating those elements from how paintings have been made for thousands of years actually feels like it has this kind of other, more real reality to it than, what these little cameras do right now, I guess.
Oh yeah, for sure, right? But you mentioning about previous eras of painting kind of reminds me of the fact that I've always thought this was interesting. Say you go to an atelier, even after your first year of atelier, you probably have a better skill set than some of the painters did in the 13th century in terms of understanding pictorial space. However, 13th century paintings are fascinating in a sense that they're so different and so unexpected in our way of thinking in today's world. They're more unique in that sense, I would say.
Yeah. And those artists were incredibly skilled and were just had different goals than, creating, realistic figures or something. They were thinking about other things.
Could be, or maybe they just didn't understand it. Like they understood the idea of perspective in the sense that, this line went this way and this line went that way, but that they never really realized that it all joins to one point and everything is related, right? Which I think is like obviously, to me, an obvious thing, but it's so fascinating that they missed that step, and that's what I think makes them unique and stands out compared to the stuff we see today, right?
Yeah, well, and it's interesting that like linear perspective is also this kind of just a formal kind of way of creating the illusion of space, but it's not actually that real in some ways. Like things do recede in space, but when we're actually kind of like when we're actually kind of living in the world and engaged in the space, we're kind of looking up and we're looking down and we're looking to the side, and angles will actually kind of have a little bit of a curvature to them because of our eyes. So linear perspective is actually not quite how we perceive the world either. So there's just these really different ways of kind of approaching how we're seeing the world.
That's a great way to think about it. Yeah.
And I don't know, I kind of like the idea that one way isn't better than the others, but they're just really different and they can communicate something different.
Yeah, you're breaking my brain here because I always thought they were definites, but in a sense, it's just another way of interpretation. It's man-made construct, right? Like temperature.
Yeah.
It's color temperature. So yeah, you just made me stutter and just rethink everything now.
No,
so this is beautiful. And Lynn
linear
in the
perspective
chat,
isn't real.
Yeah, no, that's right, 100%, right? Bend the spoon. Lynn in the chat, she says the idea of perspective is Western. It's not necessarily an overarching rule. And yeah, now who knows where I'm going to go from here? But that just broke my brain. And explains so much about your work and also the book that I'm only halfway through. I'm kind of at a loss for words now. Any other great questions while I try to regather myself? This doesn't happen very often, but when it does, it's so fascinating. Just that to have your preconceptions just broken. It's amazing.
So and that was what I liked about that book. I feel like the way that art history is often taught is as this kind of linear stepping stones of progress up to the Renaissance, and that everything that came before was just kind of, again, the stepping stones to get to linear perspective and all these things. And that book made me really start to just actually get really excited about these other kind of earlier periods for their own sake, and not just as stepping stones, but as like, wow, what an interesting way of perceiving the world. And that when we're seeing, like there's one of the examples I was giving in the class is like you're seeing a Last Supper, not in perfect Renaissance perspective like we have with Da Vinci, where you just see the top of the, where but like showing kind of the table from above and then the figures from the side. And so you're able to see all of these figures and then everything that was laid out on the table, and then also the bench in front, and then also the rafters above. Like you're able to like see so much more of this scene in such an interesting way.
You can say a lot more without having to constrain yourself within linear perspective, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, that there's like actual advantages to this other way, and that maybe that's actually more how we inhabit the world and experience the world. Like we don't really, sit back from a perfect vantage point and like kind of see everything. We're looking up and we're looking down, as we're eating, we're kind of, looking down at our plate and then up at the person across from us and kind of taking in more of this whole environment in a way that's much less rigid.
Yeah, for sure.
And much more kind of felt out. And maybe that there's actually something that's more real to that felt out, wonkier version of things than the perfectly plotted mathematical kind of distilled version.
I think I might actually understand Picasso a little bit more now, because it kind of is relatable, isn't it?
Yeah. I think there is this real relationship between those kind of early modernists and that pre-Renaissance work, where things get flat and a little bit weird. And I'm here for it. I'm here for the weirdness and the flatness.
Absolutely. It's all, because it's all about what you want to say in that space, right? In that 2D plane that we're painting on. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Just so you know, the book is called Changing Images of Pictorial Space by William V. Dunning. So you can find it on Amazon. If not, your local store can order it in. One of the comments in chat is, think about our eye moving, not fixed. Hockney looks at that in the big picture. And that's true. Now I actually understand Hockney a little bit better. He was one of my least favorite artists, but I'm gonna have to go look at him again. It's
I
interesting.
really like some of I really like Hockney has these kind of multiple, I didn't quite hear the question, but I like
There's no question. It's more of a statement, but yeah.
Oh yeah. But he'll have kind of also these kind of multiple panels with different kind of perspectives that coexist, or different seasons kind of happening in the same motif. Like you'll see a road with, in winter and in spring and in summer and that kind of thing, which I think has kind of influenced some of the paintings that I've been making, where I've been playing with those different ways of looking at the same scene and having things not quite match up, which are really cool. He has another one that's also this like road, which almost looks like he's kind of pasted. It's almost as if he like took photos of each little section of it without zooming in. And so it's like all these kind of completely zoomed in separate photos that then are kind of pasted together to make this whole big scene. And just having things kind of not quite matching up, not quite all fixed and all perfect. Is there something that's really interesting about it and makes you kind of want to look at that scene much more carefully, I think.
Yeah, no doubt. I'm gonna have to look him up again, because I've been avoiding him because I didn't understand him, I guess.
That's what I like about them. I saw a show when I was in Amsterdam for one of my last exhibitions. That was him and Van Gogh at the Van Gogh Museum together. And
interesting.
The thing I love the compositions and the like approaches that he's using, but they don't hold up. Like the Van Goghs have this like the colors are like really complex color relationships, and the surfaces are just so juicy and alive. And the Hockneys, there's a little bit of like a kind of quickness and a slickness to them, where I can't go up and have that. Like there's like when you see the Van Gogh, there's like one experience of viewing the painting from a distance, and then as you get closer, it like reveals this whole other layer of like information and wonderfulness. And the Hockneys don't do that. They're kind of like, they're cool from a distance, and as you come up, you're kind of like, yeah, okay. There's a lot there's like parts of Hockney that I like, but they don't have that same kind of richness of being paintings that I'm seeing in other work.
Yeah, but still, I mean, the fact that you're opening my mind to some things that I've just dismissed so easily in the past, I think
that's what happened for me, is that like the atelier training was very dismissive of a lot of different approaches and a lot of different work. And that there's this one value, of like being able to paint believable value, volume and space and accuracy, and that everything that doesn't do that doesn't have any value to it. And I've just gotten so much more excited about so much more work,
for sure.
and just like different qualities of things, and that I don't have to love everything about a painting to find something valuable in it, that there can be some aspect of it that is just like, oh, that's so cool, I want to try that, but it doesn't quite have this thing going. So can I take this part that I really like and then add in the part that I feel like is missing, or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's right. This interview has affected me more than others, just because it's starting to change the way I'm thinking. I can feel my brain rewiring. It's fantastic. Thank you.
Oh, well, glad I can.
You just screwed me up. That's what you did.
I'm glad I can bring in some new ideas.
That's fantastic. We are at our hour, unfortunately, but before we do go, I have two questions I ask everyone. And the first one is, what is your best piece of advice that you've been given?
One was to just kind of show up and work, like to not wait for inspiration, or, to just kind of treat it as a job and come to the studio every day. And even like the first year that I was out of school, I actually clocked in and clocked out on a spreadsheet every day to like get my hours in. So to show up at the studio and to just work, that like inspiration and ideas come through the work, and just show up and paint every day. And, even if you don't have any ideas, you just kind of paint your lunch or paint the coffee cup or whatever it is, just like paint what's in front of you. And then that like ideas are generated through the work, not through sitting at home. So that was, I think, the most useful piece of advice that I kind of took,
awesome.
Was to just kind of show up at the studio every day.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Now, the next question, I hope the answer is different, or hopefully it can be different. What is your top piece of advice you would give others right now?
I think it would be maybe it's related, but just focusing on the work and letting the work be this kind of investigation. Like I think about treating the studio kind of like a laboratory rather than a factory, so that I'm coming in and there's something that I want to like discover through making this painting. There's something I want to figure out. There's something that I want to try, that there's some reason that I'm like excited to get in there and make a painting, and to just kind of keep chasing that rather than, and some of that is that when that I'm really rigid about showing up in the studio and having my studio time. And that once I'm here, I'm really free to work on whatever I want to work on and experiment and try things out and not feel like I have deadlines, or that paintings have to be made in a specific, some paintings that are the same size, one will take 4 hours and another one will take 75 hours. And that's just how paintings go. And to be really free with the process and the investigations once I'm here, so that this is my kind of laboratory space.
I love that. I love that. That's great advice. Thank you. All right. That ends our hour. Thank you, everybody who attended. Thank you very much, Zoe. You can find Zoe on the internet at zoefrank.com. I highly recommend you look at her paintings and her pre-recorded instructional videos as well. And you can find her on Instagram at instagram.com/ZoeyFrank. With that, I'm sorry this interview's over. I got so many more questions now, but maybe we can do a follow-up maybe in a year or something.
Nice. Well, thank you all for coming. It's nice to get your questions and have everyone here.
Yeah, it's been fabulous. Thanks again, everybody. And you have a good night, Zoe.
All right. Yeah.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.